first thing that was on the strategy is soil testing. And, you know, what I've seen over the years is that if you try to take one general soil sample for, say, a 100-acre pivot, which is about the average size of the pivot, and you take 20 cores out there and mix them up, you know you're going to have areas in that field that are low, some are lower and some are higher, and that number you're getting is an average. And what happens is if you line those fields based on one number with one common rate across the whole field, the weak areas keep getting weaker to the point where they're going to drop below that 5.5 and you're going to have problems. I've seen this a number of times. How do you avoid that? And we do recommend that you go to some kind of precision ag, either grid or zone sampling. The most common is grid sampling. It's fairly easy to do. A lot of consultants offer this. And by the way, UGA has not offered this service up to this point, but we are working on it now so that whoever's taking the soil samples can run precision ag. You can see you'll get different levels of pH. But there's other things too that can go wrong with pH. How deep you take the sample. And in fact, with peanuts, it's one of the last crops we do have a tendency to deep turn a lot. And if you take a soil sample, for example, 6 inches deep, and then you go ahead and deep turn your soil and you turn it to 10 inches deep, you got 4 inches of soil on top. We don't even know what we're dealing with sometimes. So depth and all that can be mixed in there. And then time of year also. A lot of people don't know that, but if you measure pH in water, which most people do, it can vary naturally during the year, and it has to do with the salts in the soil and whether they are there or they have been leached out with a lot of rain. And I'm going to try to explain that a little bit. It's a little tricky, but at least going to throw that out there. So again, with pH, it comes down to a lot. It comes down to availability of nutrients or unavailability. If you haven't seen this kind of graph before, this is kind of the common range. You know, the pH scale goes from 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral, but our soils around here might go to 4 or 5 if you let them. You're not going to get much above 8. But the wider the bar, the more available the nutrient is at certain pHs. And what you'll notice is if between 6 and 6.5, you hit most of those bars in a good spot. And then, you know, one common thing that happens is, I told you, you know, zinc is sensitive toxicity, and if you go too low a pH, you see that zinc bar gets wide, it gets available. So we line to tie up the zinc, but then what do? We tie up the manganese also, and then we have a manganese deficiency. So you know, it's one of those things, you try to fix one problem and create another. But this is all connected, and again, I think pH is one of the major things that is probably and I don't know if it's a mistake or not, it's just we got to do you know, a really good job managing it, especially on peanut. There's numbers for zinc out of the trifold. It's in a table form. You know, you can look for flat red stems at the surface, confirm it with a soil and tissue sample. If you catch it early enough, you might even be able to bring the pH up and fix it a little bit. There's the table. You basically want to stay above this line. You know, zinc levels are probably 10 and less are common. People get real nervous when they get up around 30 or 40, but this research was done a while back and shows that as long as you're willing to take your pHs up around 6.3 or 6.4, you can even handle those levels of zinc. Now you get out here to 70, and my chart stops at 70, so you go by a 70, you're on your own. So that's all I can tell you. You might not even want to plant peanuts there. So anyway, that's the zinc issue. The manganese, there's the numbers in kind of a little table, but we also have a graph for it. Again, you want to keep your manganese levels above this line, depending on where you're on pH. And the higher you run your pHs, the higher you have to run your manganese in the soil so you don't get manganese deficiency. So that's another. The good news is manganese deficiency, we don't think it hurts us that bad even if you get it, but we're still probably going to recommend manganese sulfate foliar sprays to take care of that. All right, quickly, what this issue about time of year and pH is different, it gets a little tricky because we actually make 2 different measurements on pH when you send a sample to the lab. And there's some differences between private labs and what we do at UGA now. I told you that most private labs run their what we call active acidity, what you think of as your pH in your soil and water, and then they run a buffer pH, which is the reserve acidity. the hydrogen's connected to the clay and organic matter in the soil. Kind of the potential acidity, if you will. University of Georgia, we switched years ago to measuring active acidity in salt, and then doing a little different on how we measure that reserve acidity. The reason we went to salt is a perfectly legitimate way of measuring pH, and it takes out that year effect. And basically, the issue that can happen is that if you run a pH on a soil about this time of year, when the soil has gotten really wet, a lot of rainfall, it leaches the salts out, and it affects that number, and it comes out higher than it's supposed to be, so it falls high. Now, how wet does the soil sample have to be, etc.? That's a good question. If you've got water running out of the bag, it's probably too wet. Then the next comment or question I get, people say, well, they dry it when they get to the lab. Yeah, well, the problem is the salts are already out of the sample, they're gone. So even though they dry it, when they re-wet it, it affects the reading. So just be aware of that, that there is some differences. And trying to bring that all home and explain it a little better. This is hard to explain this concept in 10 words or less. Don't count, Bob, how many words. But basically, soils have a net negative charge. They have positives and minuses, but negative charge. And those negative charges come from clay and organic matter. And those can hold positively charged things. That's as simple as I can make it. It makes sense. But what's interesting is, if you visualize this as two soil particles, when you run an active pH, you're measuring that hydrogen that's floating around in the water solution between those particles. And then when you measure buffer pH, you're measuring these hydrogens that are connected and held on to the soil on those negative charges. So that's the difference between those two measurements. All right. This is an example of, this was research done back in 82 and 83 by my old research counterpart, Gary Gasho. Two different soils, and it just shows you how, without doing anything to these two different soils, how the pH changes over time. I had a county agent one time tell me, well, I'm going to put a bucket of soil in my office and measure the pH every month. I said, well, that doesn't make really sense, because why you're getting this issue is because out in the field, you're getting that rainfall to leach those soils out. So if you put it in your office, it's going to be the same as the day you put it in your office, probably. But you get the point. It will change naturally over time if you measure it in water. And again, we think measuring salt levels that out. I've had some questions on, will it be the average of these two or whatever? That's a good question. But we do think the salt method's a more accurate measurement. All right. I think that was 15 minutes out of 20 on pH, but I do think that's the most common mistake, so I don't feel bad about spending much time on it. But I'll run through the others real quickly, that you can do mistakes and hurt your profit. But I think some of these aren't as common as the others. Calcium, of course, is the big issue. I think we do a pretty good job knowing that and putting gypsum out. And sometimes we even put it out as a kind of an insurance when we might not even need it. I guess one mistake you can make when putting gypsum out is be careful, though, not to put it out too late. Peak pod fill, when you really need that calcium going right through that shell into that nut, 60 to 90 days after planting. So we say early bloom, so what, 30, 35, 40 days after planting. When you get out to like 70 days and haven't put gypsum out, you might be getting a little too late. So I guess timing of gypsum would be another mistake. I don't know how common that is, but it could be a mistake you make in the area of calcium. Potassium, we haven't had a lot of issues over the years, although for a while there with short rotations and a lot of rainfall, we started to see a little bit of potassium deficiency on peanut. But we've got good handle on the levels you need in your soil, and you can get too low. You need potassium. I think we did too good a job of saying, hey, your P&K levels are good, you don't need any, but you can get too low, where we will recommend potassium if you get too low, and there's the levels. Same thing with phosphorus. Phosphorus is even more rare. I don't think I've ever seen a confirmed phosphorus deficiency on peanut in 25 years. Nitrogen, pretty critical one, obviously. With peanut, it fixes nitrogen, but when you grow enough peanuts around, you can probably get away on some fields not inoculating. I like to see inoculant on every field every year. just because some things can go wrong even in short short rotations. And this is a field, I borrowed this slide from Scott Tubbs. He has to actively go out to find areas that haven't had any peanuts on them in a while to get these kind of responses. But you can see you can have nitrogen problems if you don't inoculate or it doesn't nodulate well. The good news, if you catch it early, you can fix it with only about 60 pounds of nitrogen per acre. A lot of people say that doesn't sound like enough. I mean, the peanut will fix like probably 200 pounds of nitrogen. How can 60 fix it? But Dr. Tubbs and I, and really he took the lead on it, did some research, and we went up to 120, 180 pounds. But that first 60 seems to be pretty critical, and we'll fix that problem. Sulfur, supposedly somebody came down from, I think, the Carolinas last year, drove around and said every field in Georgia, peanut field in Georgia, is sulfur deficiency. I'm not sure what, maybe something's wrong with their glasses or something. I'm not sure what happened. You know, if you're using gypsum, you're getting a good shot of sulfur. Peanuts are good at scavengers of things like sulfur. We'll get sulfur in the subsoil on a good soil like a Tifton. I really don't think we're having a lot of sulfur issues. Now, cotton and corn, yeah, we got to make sure we put sulfur out or we'll have problems, but a peanut should not be as critical. And then same thing with magnesium. Again, in 25 years, I've never seen a magnesium deficient peanut. Boron's an interesting one. We have a half pound of boron recommendation on not only peanut, but cotton and corn, soybeans also. Our recommendation is a half pound. There's a lot of products out there that have a lot of different things in them, but basically, boron's boron. The only thing I'd say is look out for those real low rates. 6 ounces of a 5% material gives you 0.025. And it's kind of interesting to me because a lot of times universities, we get accused of being too conservative with recommendations. There's our recommendation, half a pound, and then you got people falling for this one and going out there with 0.025 pounds, which is obviously not close to being enough. I've done the research. 0.025, it looks just like the untreated chick. Okay? So just be careful of that. And then I'll finish with micronutrients. Copper, iron, molybdenum, and chlorine. Copper comes up once in a while. Molybdenum is important for nitrogen fixation. So if you have a molybdenum problem, it should show up as a nitrogen problem. But we have not had any really confirmed issues and problems with these micronutrients. They should be really rare.